Hello, today's video is titled Wearing a Mask to Get the Rewards of Being a Mediocre Man. Yeah, I don't mean that to be insulting. You know, there's all sorts of different character types, but when you look at it from the perspective of pure reality, right? Take away all the delusions, all the aspirations, all the self-deceptions, and you see yourself with that clear perspective. You have to understand that when you're trying to just be a normal person, which is something that is rewarded, you have to wear a mask. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, pretty much, if you are a man, who doesn't just fit in, doesn't trust everything that you hear, you don't just sit back and see everything as random, like you try and look at causes behind events. I think you know what I'm getting at. Well, that kind of guy, that mentality produces a way of thinking where you don't necessarily have thoughts in your head that are acceptable by the average man and woman that you're going to come into contact with in places that count. You know what I'm saying? Like workplaces, the dating market, your local recreational centre if you're into a sport, like rugby or football or judo, whatever. And you find yourself when you're accessing these spaces trying to get what you can from these spaces, but you're just not being yourself. You're constantly self-checking. And that is called masking in the neurodiverse community. And the thing about wearing a mask is that it works for a while, because I, for example, have developed a way of behaving where I just try and think up key things that are important for the average man and average woman. So, like, I talk about soccer, and all that, and I talk about like really mundane shit, and I try and pretend that I understand where the key points of the culture are being consumed. So, I'll talk about TV shows and all that, and I'll talk about something that's like in the news that everyone seems to think is important, everyone has an opinion on, and I'll come up with the most acceptable perspective. But deep down, it's just a fucking fraud. Deep down, I don't think this shit at all. And you've got all this freaking constant interactions. And why do you do this for? Because the alternative is, if you're yourself all the time, you just get excluded. And that means you don't get your normie bucks, It means that in a social environment, you're just constantly hated. And even if you're not constantly hated, you're constantly arguing. And I find that stressful. So I just pretend that I agree with them. And you're constantly coming across as too individualistic, too different, and then you've got to justify yourself all the time with why you are, so you just pretend that you're not. And this leads into what I classify as the primary, most efficient male within the whole different spectrum of different types of men. You know, you've got these guys, especially in Britain nowadays, and they've got a bit of appeal because they pertain to the culture, right? You know, it could be some dude who's into urban music, you know, dresses in that way. He speaks in that lingo. He's got that image. And he's got an appeal. He's got a layer of protection as well. And then you've got a guy that's like, he's a reality TV type of guy. It's almost like he's constantly being filmed. And he's got a certain type of appeal. But then you've got this huge, massive dudes who are like programmed, you know, not by the society, but by their own genetics. And they just have this level of competency. I've spoken about it before. They're called oofy doofies. And they're just good enough to do the things that need to be done. Like, they've got this instinctive intelligence. I wish I fucking had it, man. It's like the things that matter, they're good at. Like, everything else, they're just totally mundane, but they're good at the things that count. You know, like if they're driving a bus, they drive it really well. Or if they're like a plumber, they do it really well. Or if they're like some type of engineer, they do it really well. And they're needed. And they don't even think about what they're doing. They just do it instinctively because they naturally know what they're good at, and they naturally learn what they need to learn. Some of them have a few trials and errors, but they instinctively stick at things. Their frustration, their boredom level, their sense of doing what needs to be done. They've got this instinctive mindset that makes them carry on, and they socialize in a way where they're really normal because they don't question a fucking thing. And they slot into these spaces and they get the crumbs of society. But a lot of women like him because they think, well, you know, he's stable. He's got a stake in society. He's got a bit of status. He doesn't rock the boat. He's probably going to have a fairly decent life. He doesn't cause me any stress. And they make these predictions, and then they shack up with them. And these types of guys, man, they get that mediocre level of attainment. It's much better if you compare it to fucking weirdos like me, you know. And that's what masking is. You're trying to make yourself a mediocre man because it's better than being a fucking weirdo. And that's the problem and the solution, man. That's why I've always said on the Jack Tisson channel that this is a channel for normies or aspiring normies. Yeah, I ain't no bones about it. That's what I am. I'm a fucking aspiring normie, you know. And some people get what I'm saying, and some people think, oh, you're just submissive to society. Well, I've had the alternative, you know. Where did it get me? Mental hospitals, prisons, homeless centres, always arguing always stressed out, always angry, always justifying myself. I just gave in. I want to relax and have an easy time, so I just mask. And the thing is, if you mask enough, you start becoming what you're trying to mask. You know? And that's the thing. That's how you change, man. So, what I'm trying to say to you is that if you're an outsider, you're an outcast, you can spend your life hating, being full of rage, or you can just yield a bit. You haven't got to yield totally, but just yield a bit. You know, play the game, and you might get a few crumbs, you know? And them crumbs are better than what you had before. And those are the types of people who understand what I'm getting at. We've been where we've been, man. You know, you understand what I'm saying. Others would go, oh, you're just a fucking conformist CUNT. All right. Well, okay. You're just submissive to society. Okay. I was living in hell, man, and I had to change. Anyway, check this one out. Thank you.